So I'm finally done with the Polish Lynx project that I've been working on. I looked around for a discreet carry bag to put it in, and looked at a lot of really nice ones online, but I ended up just going with this piece of luggage that was given to me as a gift, and it actually fits in there perfectly with the stock folded. So to start with, I'll just start from the front and work my way back. The spot weld that was used to hold the little muzzle device on there, the muzzle nut, just ground that off with a Dremel, and that took about 4 minutes. Really wasn't any problem at all. Installed this Landtech brake on here, and that went on real easy, and no problems at all with that. The front sight post was a problem. It was as if WBP had coated it in red Loctite and painted over it just for good measure. I broke 2 front sight tools attempting to get that off of there, and no pliers would move it. Finally I had to grind it down. This was after using a heat gun to loosen up the thread locker or whatever they put on it. But I ground it down and hammered a socket onto it and was able to wrench it out of there. So I just can't imagine why something that you would need to adjust on the gun would be cemented in place like that. But that's how they did it. But eventually I put in my own front sight post that's very fine. I'm going to have to point the gun at you. And that went in there with no problem. Moving back, they don't have a rear sight that comes with this tactical version. So I went around and looked online, and it turns out that there's virtually nobody that makes a Weaver attached rear sight notch. So I had to make my own, and I actually used a 30mm scope ring that I just ground off the bottom half of, and used a file to file a rear notch in it, and it actually, you know, will work okay, I believe, once I try it out. But it co-witness is in the lower 1/3 of the primary arms MD ADS that I've got mounted here. Don't really think I'd ever have to use it, but for a Hellenbach truck gun like this, they're nice to have just in case something were to happen. Yeah, again, the primary arms MD ADS is excellent optic, 7-year battery life, have them on a lot of guns. They've always worked really well for me. Moving back, added this extended charging handle right here. It was about a 3-minute job. Just used a lot of blue Loctite on the Allen screw that I put in there, and it makes it really handy for when you're going under the gun like this. Just gives you a little bit more to grip on. I think it looks great as well, and it's a really inexpensive, quick add-on. Like I said before, the safety was pretty brutal on my hand whenever I would come back to try and charge the gun. If you're using the underhanded position here, I ground off about half of this shelf that they've welded here onto the safety. Again, that's great that they did that. I love having that as a feature, but it was absolutely chopping my hand up and drawing blood, and made more of a sloping angle on that. It was still cutting my hand up, so I actually put on a rubber cement called shoe goo, of all things, and made it to where it's a little bit duller, and painted over it. And now it's not chopping my hand up. I know with AKs you're supposed to wear gloves, but I rarely ever do. Inside, I replaced the trigger with a Geisley AKT. It feels right at home in a gun like this that's made to put rounds on targets fast. Again, we can see that this is empty, and has a really crisp pull and a really short reset. So these, it's kind of like a Super Dynamic 3-gun trigger if you've ever messed with one of those in an AR, but it just begs to be shot fast. I absolutely love them. The only thing I don't like is that it's kind of hard to make precise shots, because occasionally you'll get it to bump fire or double on you. If you're not going to mess with the fire control group, the factory clips that they've got inside holding the trigger pins in place will work great. But but if you're going to want to do anything to the trigger whatsoever, go ahead and buy a trigger pin retaining plate to drop in there. It's well worth the $5 or whatever it costs, and because the clips that they've got to keep the pins in place from the factory are they're almost impossible to get back on. And it takes nothing to install that firing pin retaining plate. Also bent and ground on the safety until it was clicking on and off with very little effort. It took a while. You can just bring it up straight vertical and bend it out, and I had to grind a little bit on the inside of it to get it to where it felt really smooth and had a positive click on and off. On the back, I've added this Stormworks AR buffer tube folding adapter. This was very tricky because I don't own a drill press or a center punch or anything like that, and even after measuring it several times, the drill wandered to the right. And the spacing between the two holes that I made was made it to where the screws just barely fit in there. You have to drill and tap it. If I could do it over again, I'd give it to a gunsmith and let them get it perfect, but it actually worked out pretty well. It's off by just a little bit, but really no problem at all. I added on this Tailhook Mod 1 arm brace to the back. And, the only thing I didn't like about this was that the screws that they use to hold the Tailhook Mod 1 in place are they're kind of soft and they're really small. And at first this thing wanted to move on me, so I tightened it down really hard and ended up rounding off one of the screws back here. Now it's not moving anymore, but if I wanted to take it off for whatever reason, I'd have to get a tool to remove that. The folding mechanism back here is extremely stiff. You have to push down on it and then fold over, and it actually locks into place in the closed position. I'd rather it not do that just because it's kind of slow to deploy. But with some practice, you can still get it working. Let's see here. I've added a sling, which is pretty much just a piece of webbing with a quick detach swivel back here, some paracord, and duct tape. I've cut up some bike inner tube right here to kind of keep this folded in place so that it doesn't get hung up on anything. Extremely cheap, but works well for my purposes. Replace the grip with this US Palm version. The stock AK grips for me are usable, but they're really intended for somebody that has small hands that's wearing humongous mittens in Siberia or something like that. So for the shooting I do, this grip angle and size works better for me. I haven't had a chance to shoot it yet, but I'll get footage of that when I do. I'm going to primarily use these 20-round magazines just for weight and size purposes, but all the 30-round magazines that I put in there have worked really well.